All right. So I promised you guys a little flex time today. Now I have a couple of projects that I've been working on. As I mentioned, some stuff that um, I guess can be for me, but also is going to be for the greater good of what I'm trying to do while I'm in quarantine, and that is, probably even get freelance work and still make a little extra money when I have the time. The one I'm going to show you today isn't about money. It was about me just messing around. Um, so I had this drum track that I don't know if anyone looked at the Instagram page recently in the last 24 hours, but I started messing around with some drums. I do like playing drums. I'm self-taught, so I use it as a way of practicing, letting off steam. Some people have, their own methods of releasing energy. I've been trying to do the running thing, and I've been trying to do skateboarding and rollerblading and all sorts of random stuff that can keep me active, especially when it's nice out. So I also set up drums in my detached garage attic, and you can see it there in the picture at the top left. And so I've just been, playing around with songs and messing around. And the other day, what I decided to do is throw some microphones around. So I threw a kick drum mic. This was the D112 from AKG on the kick drum. And then I had a room mic, which is the SEX1. The X1 became my kind of room mic because I didn't have an omnidirectional. So I use this as my directional microphone, but large capsule cardioid to capture the cymbals because it can handle the high frequencies, the snare and the toms. So between that and the kick, I was kind of able to, I guess, get some sort of signal down. And I think these were in sync, if I'm not mistaken. We'll just solo this for a minute. So this is kind of how it played out. I recorded it like 3 or 4 times, and then also video recorded it. Obviously, as you can see, I have a GoPro here at my house, and kind of messed around with some signaling and did some EQing and compressing, as you can see over here in the inspector, EQ and compression. We'll start with the kick drum. So this is what the kick drum is. So yeah, I mean, the kick drum sounds pretty flat. To be honest with you, the kick drum itself is really old, and the front head of the kick drum is missing one of its bracket holders. So as good as it may sound, it really isn't that great. Number two, my kick drum pedal is very squeaky. You can actually almost hear it and see it right there. If you could see, there's little waveform sitting right there. It's a little anomaly. That's the squeaking of the kick drum. So this is the actual air pressure coming out of the kick drum hole, and then this is the squeak. So you can hear when the kick drum pedal gets pulled back. Well, anyway, why am I even going through all this? Well, it's because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get this to work for me. And meaning to say, what FlexTime can do for me in this regard is allow me to move these little pedal movements and to move the kick drum hits themselves to a point where they're perfectly in time with what they need to be in time with. Now, I've already done this, by the way. This is like the first iteration of this project. I've already gone through it and finished it and finalized it over the last 48 hours or so. But let's just take a look at these kick drum hits. So as you can see, they're happening in a pattern, 1, 2, 1, 2. So it's a up, 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 up. And you can see this one right here is a little messy. So we want to try to go in and clean that up. I want to put this particular waveform back in time with the rest of the kick drum. So 2 together. So it's pum pum pet, right? Pum pum pet. Okay. So here's what it sounds like out of time. And now, see, that's not the way it's supposed to go. You can see the pattern is it dum dum det. It's not that. I screwed up the pattern there right at the very beginning of the track. So I want to pull this guy in closer with this guy to match the kick drum hits. All right. We'll do one more time. So I want to squeeze that guy over here without changing anything else in the project. I don't want to slow this down. I don't want to speed any of this up. What people try to do, and I'll give you this, people try to cut it out like this and then move it, physically move it. Does that work? It can work, sure. And right now my drag feature is crossfade, so we'll just move that over here. All right. So now it's a little closer to it. Well, that did not work out as well as I thought it would. Let's move that back a little bit and then trim this back a little more. Like that. Here we go. You could hear there's like an open area now that's made because I touched that part. So there has to be some sort of gap to fill this. You see how it starts to become a little less um, uh, easy, I'll say. I was going to say it just becomes more complex to try to cut and paste it rather than using what you already have and being able to go in and just move it without changing all of this other stuff. That's what FlexTime can help you do for drums. We'll talk about stuff for vocals as well. So let's go ahead and activate FlexTime really quick. To do that, as you recall, the FlexTime is up here. So we're going to go ahead and hit Flex. And then you can see on the track header, FlexTime opens up a little bit and allows us to see some of the features and functions that are involved with the process. Obviously, in order to turn it on, we're going to have to hit it on the track itself. But then there's this drop-down menu of things that we're going to take a look at in a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and hit FlexTime. And you can see that Logic Pro is now going to analyze my entire drum kick track. And what it did magically is that it actually gave us slices. These slices are now all editable. I can move them around freely without changing pitch or speed. It literally just allows me to move it. So if I were to come in here and grab this guy, I could move it closer. The problem ends up becoming with that particular move that the space between these two became faster, and you're going to hear that. And the space between this line and this line became much slower, and you're going to hear this slow down a little bit. Now, I don't want to do that. I want to physically move the entire piece. What I'll probably end up doing is possibly even getting rid of this slice, getting it right before it, somewhere around here, and then moving the entire moving the entire section, there we go, a little over until I get it to where I want it to be. So I don't change a lot of the pitch. I'm just kind of moving it a little bit. Now, this obviously becomes a lot easier in grid mode. If I were to line this up with a grid and get into a specific BPM, this would allow me a little more visualization of how these hits are going to align to the grid. Basically, what we're doing is quantizing the grid. So take a look at this. Let's see what happens when I did that. And it worked a little bit. It actually gave me that second hit, exactly kind of what I was looking for, that boom, boom, bit, boom, boom, bit. And so this guy actually is not part of that. So we have to be a little careful here because that actually pedal part also represents a little bit of the snare that's in the mic. Yeah, see, and I want this guy over, not that guy over. So let's move that. And you hear what happened? If I move this too much, if I make a movement that really stretches out that kick too much, you get this weird, very, very strange sound that almost sounds like artifacting, a very digital sound. Here, I'll let you hear it again. I'm not sure you guys can hear it without my mic up to it. Hold on. I don't know if you heard that, but it sounded like a giraffe dying. That's what it sounded like. So I want to be very careful on the amount of flex that I add into a project, because the more you do, the more the computer has to throw in random noise to fill in the holes. That random noise does have a sound after a while. You know, when you're in dithering and you're trying to fill in gaps when you're going from digital back to analog, the computer is very good at smoothing out the digital to analog signal. But when you're doing stuff like this and you're making these huge stretches and holes, the computer has to fill in a lot more sound, and it starts to become audible sound that you do not want in there, like a very weird, that's what it sounded like to me on this end. So we got to be careful on how we do that. Now, one of the things that can help me is this ability to go in and change the type of flexing that's going to happen. So let's take a look at this. First of all, by default, most of my mono audio tracks are going to be in monophonic. So my mono audio tracks, which is what these are, they were recorded by a microphone. They're going to be in monophonic. So when the computer gets into FlexTime and starts analyzing the transients, it'll start doing it for this mode and this mode only. Excuse me for. There we go. Big sneeze. Sorry. So that's why, FlexTime and monophonic works, and works more for audio like vocals. That's kind of where this particular algorithm in FlexTime goes. There is also something called slicing, which basically is, roughly around the same thing, only that, it looks at things a little differently when it analyzes them. So let me just take flex mode off for a moment, and we'll put flex mode back in, and hold on. There we go. Turn this off, turn this back on, and there we go. So now slicing did it just a slight bit differently, but again, it's still analyzing transients. And then again, when I move it, you could see it actually pulls away from that snare hit. Remember that? Remember I told you when I was pulling the snare, it actually was presenting something a little different. It was stretching out that snare and creating that digital yuck sound. In this case, slicing actually will pull it away from that sound. So I got to be actually really careful on how that sliced. You could see it left a little piece of audio there that I might want to move around. So let's move that back here. You see that little piece there? I got to be careful. And yeah, it is stretching this out a little bit, but not as bad as it was when I was in monophonic. You could see it's really not pulling it away from this. So slicing for this actually works a little better. Let's hear how that sounds. You can see there is a little bit of a stutter there, and we can actually go back in and fix that in a minute. Let's hear that again. Boom, look at that. That was perfect. Here it is again. I'll try to turn it up a little bit. All right, sweet. That's exactly what I was looking for. So slicing in a drum kick actually worked better than in mono. I want to drive this home that each of these FlexTime modes are different in how they react to when you're using flexing. One thing I probably would do just to kind of clean this up is I'd put another mark there. As you can see, I can add new slicing markers, and then I'd pull that back just a little bit, just so it didn't give me that weird digital sound. And there still is some sort of weird like digital remnants there, artifacting, and I got to try to figure out, I'd be a little more careful on how I pull that out of there. But it seems to be a better way of doing it using the slicing mode than the monophonic mode. Let's try another mode. We'll turn these off and turn them back on just to do a quick reset. This time we're going to use Rhythmic. All right, so Rhythmic, that sounds like it should work perfectly for what we're doing. I want to put this into a rhythm. That's what this is, a pattern. So go ahead and pop it into Rhythmic mode, and let's take a look-ski at how that reacts. All right, so it looks like it's doing something very similar to our original monophonic mode. Let's see what happens now when I pulled it apart. You can see now this stretched out a lot more, so you're probably going to hear some artifacting here. Let's hear. Actually, it wasn't as bad. If you remember, in the other mode, in monophonic mode, this really stretched out and sounded pretty bad. I mean, like I said, it sounded like a dying giraffe. Now it just seems like there's a little bit of an echo, but nothing crazy, nothing I can't mask over. What I'm really looking for is obviously that kick hit to be right on rhythm. So I'm going to have to maybe move over just a little more. Let's see. All right, not bad. Let's try a different way. Instead of using the all three, which moves things on either side of it, let's try in this mode to just adjust it a little bit. So that's one of the things you should take a look at as well. When you're flex timing, below the center line, you're going to be adjusting three different ones, the one in the middle and the one to the left and the one to the right, and that allows you to adjust. In the top mode, you're moving just that middle line. And you got to be really careful when you're creating and moving things like this one. That will get you into a whole new world that you don't want to be in. So just be careful on how you're analyzing your flexing. Again, putting it dead center in the middle kind of moves everything off to the left and the right. Sorry, I'm just going to reset that. Up here at the top allows you that movement, but just this one. It really doesn't grab onto all three like that one does. You can tell by the triangle at the top here, see? And so at the top of the line, above the line, you're at single. The bottom, you're at 3. Check this out. When you're in a blank space, you can create 3 different slices. And at the top, you can create a single slice. Well, that 3 didn't add. There we go. That's better. And then that slice can be used. So you can create new slices beyond what the computer already saw as transients. So it's looking for peaks in the audio waveform as it made its analyzation. You could see down here, peak, 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 peak. Even though it was smaller than the other peaks, it's still a peak. It didn't make one right here, which was interesting. Didn't find this snare as being a peak. So I can actually grab it and make it its own peak. So now what happens is, now when I move this back into rhythm, it's only going to stretch out the snare as opposed to the other kick. And actually, that's not that bad. In Rhythmic, it's actually making a better judgment on the slice. Here, take a listen. So it sounds a little artifacty, but not digital artifacty, not something that I can't mask with this. So for instance, if I go ahead and bring in my overhead now, oh, now I got to move the one on that track too. So we'll have to go into this track and match that movement for the FlexTime in just a moment. We'll just analyze it right now, throw it into Rhythmic, and there. And then you could see here that the snare, that or the kick rather, that was supposed to be here, has to move over to match this. That's interesting. Let's see. So this is going to be the problem. So this one right here, that's the one I got to move. Oop, not there. It's the one I have to move over to here a little better. Well, let's get rid of this slice. And let's move it in here. And let's see if that helps. Yeah, there's a little stutter there, but now let's bring them both in and see how they work together. All right, so it's getting a little dirty. And so I'll probably have to go in and clean that up a little more intently by kind of, messing around with some of these slices. Get rid of that one. I don't need that one. And try to match it up a little better. Obviously, this is the snare hit coming through the kick drum, and this is the snare hit that's on the hi-hat, on the overhead. And then I have to make sure those line up, which they do. And then I have the kick, which is faintly in here, and the other kick, which is right here in line with that. So we're working pretty good here. And what I probably would end up doing is just moving that off. So let's hear how that sounds. Yeah, it still sounds a little rolly, like it kind of rolls into each other. And without spending, 15 minutes myself, which is probably what it would take to kind of lock this down perfectly with you online, I would go back and kind of mess around with it until I got it to exactly where I want it to be. Let's take a look at something else. We did rhythm, we did slicing. Let's see what else is out there for us. Yeah, and I moved that back now, so we're going to have to try something else. Polyphonic. That's interesting. So polyphonic, what that means is that it's multiple tones and notes. So it's going to actually not only do the analyzation with this in mind, but it's also going to help you pull and drag and move while still trying to keep a lot of the polyphonic noise intact. Now, that's hard to kind of fathom right now, that I can actually move, let's say, a piano chord and stretch it or condense it or slow it down and speed it up and move it in time without interrupting all 3 notes. But that's what polyphonic does. That's the analyzation. So between monophonic being a voice or a single channel, polyphonic is multiple voices and multiple mixes. So it basically ends up analyzing it and allowing you to edit it as if it was a polyphonic um, piece of. Sorry, I'm letting Bob in. Robbo's in the class. All right. So anyway, polyphonic works better when you're working with multiple notes and tones. So a piano or a guitar chord or things like that. That's where FlexTime for those types of sounds would be. Then we have these other ones. These are quote unquote effects based FlexTime methods. So we have speed and we have tempophone. All right. So speed is, basically speeding up or slowing down, but it's used to the point where it becomes an effect as opposed to a utility or a tool in order to achieve a certain goal. Like I said, my goal for this one is to get this kick drum back into the pattern of 1-2 hit, 1-2 hit. Then this has got to move over here, right? 1-2 hit. But I wanted to do that in a way that it didn't affect too much around it and cause some sort of disgusting noise. We found, like I said, that rhythmic and slicing do it better for the kick drum than anything else. Right now I'm in polyphonic. But let's take a look at what speed does. So I'm going to put it into speed effects, and let's do that stretch, same thing here. And let's hear what the result of that is. Now that's dirty. That is really dirty. You can hear that this snare here not only was distant and not in the mix as it was before, but it also becomes super slow. And the pitch went down with it as well. So it was not only speed, but it was also the pitch of the sound. Then I don't know if you could hear, but the kick right here ended up speeding up. That's why it's bright as opposed to gray. And because of that, the pitch went way up. So it wasn't the normal pitch of the kick drum like these are, these hits, right? This sounded a lot different, right? So that's not what I wanted to do, especially in drums. You can't have the sound slow down in the background and speed up and change pitch at the same time. So like I said, that's not really technically used to match rhythm and time. That's used more like an effect. Like I want to sound like it's in slow motion. Let's take a look at what tempophone does. What is tempophone? Well, let's make the move and let's listen to the result and find out what that meant. Very interesting. So this actually did speed it up and slow it down, but did not change the pitch. And this is very much like Verispeed. So Verispeed, if you recall that we did last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, I lose track. Verispeed allowed you to speed up or slow down the project. And in some cases allowed you to speed it up and slow it down while also changing pitch. That is a very similar concept here with FlexTime. We can speed it up and slow it down with pitch, or we can speed it up and slow it down without pitch. So it made it faster or slower, but it did not change its pitch when we were in tempophone. Now, it did sound different, of course, when you're using it to this level. When you're using this much of any effect, you're going to get a change in sound. But it wasn't the change that speed gave us. I'll do it again. Let's look at speed, and I'll move my piece over to where I want it. Now, let's listen to the result. Okay, so there's that. And now I'm going to change it back to tempophone, and I'm going to make the same movement. All right, and this is what this result. I don't know if you can hear it, but it almost sounds like a transformer in the background. Then it is quite a different result, but yet both have their good and bad parts. And it all depends, again, on what you want to do. Do I want a complete sound change? Do I just want a speed change? What do I want out of this? For us, just going back really quick, because Rob and Trey just came in the chat or in the Zoom lesson, what we're trying to do is move this kick drum back into a rhythm like the other ones. So this one's kick, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, and then all of a sudden a kick came right after. I want to move this kick over a little bit so it follows the pattern. Kick, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare. All right. So to do that better, we're going to try to find which one of these flex time modes allows us that move the best way. Monophonic, as we said, is used more for vocals and monotoned noise. Slicing is really good for things like this because it's not technically rhythmic, but it's definitely something that will cut and slice and not let things stretch as far, resulting in all sorts of digital noise and artifacting. Rhythmic works out well as because it really has that concept in its algorithm to present things in a rhythmic way. And polyphonic, we said, was multiple notes, tones, and stuff like that. So they all have their own reason for being good at what they do. We found that the slicing one actually worked pretty well. So we were able to take that, cut it away from, and revisit this kick, kick, snare, right? And that's exactly what we're looking for. What we did leave is a little bit of artifacting here because we had to move this so far. So it's just a little bit of artifacting. But like I said, we can cover that up with another microphone, right? So it doesn't sound as bad by itself. Almost sounds like there's something stuck in the snare, like little metal balls floating around in the snare. But we covered that up with another thing. We call that masking. We're masking that little indiscrepancy with something much louder in the mix. And in the end, we're going to get the result we're looking for. And it does take some time and effort to blend it together. So slicing worked for us in this regard. And then we also tried rhythmic. So let's move that guy over here. Let's see how that result was. It was a very similar result. We still got that little tinny ball sound happening. But again, when we mask it with the other track, we'll probably get a better result. Right. So now we're talking. We're not getting any artifacting in that mix. We're still getting the that pattern that I was looking for. This ends up being probably the one I would go with, is probably rhythmic, because again, it's in a pattern. It analyzes an algorithm that comes in, works good. So this was a little area that I was very concerned with. And you can see down the row as we look at these patterns. That was pretty good here. Uh-oh, we have another one here that probably needs to be fixed. So I would come in and probably end up pulling that in just a little closer. Let's see how that sounds. Oh, well, that was a different part then. Okay, so that one actually was fine. I missed a kick here. I don't know if that was necessary. But you could see that I'm just looking at patterns, right? 1, 2 hit, 1, 2 hit, 1, 2 hit, 1, 2 hit, 1, 2 hit. And then I made sure that this wasn't a mistake. I was just looking, maybe it was a different part of the song. You could see it does get back into the pattern of 1, 2 hit, 1, 2 hit, 1, 2 hit, 1, 2 hit. So when you know you're in that pattern, depending on what you're playing and depending on what was recorded, you can go in and fine tune that pattern. And by fine tune, I actually mean you could do some really, really cool stuff with this. Let me explain this, because this is going to get a little more advanced now. So pay attention. I'm going to get rid of my, where is it? No, I'm not going to get rid of my inspector. Okay, I thought I had my library open. So all of these kicks and these hits were analyzed. The computer went in and dropped in little slicing markers when I activated FlexTime to signify the start of each transient. Because it was able to do that, I can now use quantization on audio. Yes, I said it. I can now quantize audio. How the heck do I do that? Recall back in early days when we talked about the inspector and its parts and its ability, we showed you that in here, there is the ability to quantize. Now, you may not see it right away, but when you drop down the region, as you can see on the track itself, we're in Rhythmic and we're using FlexTime. But now I have the ability on this one region here to quantize it. So check this out. If I click on it and I hit quantize, I can actually go in and have those slices jump to a quantized grid. Let's see what happens when I do half note. Holy cow, look at that. Do you see that it actually went through and pulled these slices to the nearest half note? Let's hear what the result of that would be. That's going to be interesting. We'll take off the pretty cool, right? So I was able to move and shift every single hit, every single slice, every single flex time marker to the nearest half note. What else can we do? Let's do the nearest whole note. Now, this is going to make some drastic changes, as you can see. Let's hear what it sounds like. It's actually not too bad. Let's go 64th note. And you can see a lot less was done there because it's such a small increment. The result is actually much different, though. But very interesting that once flex time is engaged, here's eighth note. Oh, boy. So that result was really different. I don't know if you could hear that, but that's a very, very different result because I quantized it to an eighth note. Let's go back to a quarter note here. Let's see how that result is. All right, so a little change, nothing crazy, but it does definitely change things. So what's really great about this, and again, what I'm trying to do is just trying to perfect recordings. I'm not trying to make something out of nothing. This was recorded, and by the way, again, I am not by any means a professional drummer. I've been practicing, I've been messing around. It's more like a hobby to me. I'm just kind of using this as an example. But there are some drummers that need to be put into some sort of, even good drummers that need to be put back into rhythm. We are only human, and even some of the best drummers aren't exactly perfect. Now, I don't know if I'd ever want a perfect drummer. I don't know if I'd ever want somebody that was a robot. Then why even use a real drummer? Sample a drum kit and use it in MIDI. But what we're trying to do is trying to get the performance to be the best performance it can be. And instead of working your drummer to the bone with calluses on their hands and sweating through their multiple shirts, why do that when I can record a good recording? I can take his good performance, not great, but good, but make it great and make it swing into time the best it can be. Now, this is fine for just the kick drum, right? I can get that kick drum aligned perfectly. The problem then becomes, since these all these movements were made, what happens to the other mics and the movements they made? That's interesting. So we're going to combine another thing that we worked with, I think it was 2 weeks ago, or maybe even last week, and that's using a groove track. Using a groove track. Once I have my kick exactly where I want it, now I can get the other ones to jump in line with that. Let's go into this one for a moment and take a listen again. This is the overhead mic, right? I mean, my drums sound like garbage because literally they're in the top part of my attic and they are garbage. But if we now bring both of these in, it's going to sound a little off because a lot of these kicks were moved just a little bit. So it's going to sound a little busy. Let's see. It's almost like there's a little bit of doubling on the kicks, not double hits, but a hit and then a split second later another hit, because these two mics are, number one, at about a 6 feet away distance. So there's going to be a natural delay in time from direct sound to sound in the room. And now I'm also making big changes to the room as well by shifting these kick drums. Some of them are moving up, some of them are moving back. So I want these to kind of jump in line with each other. And this is where quantization of your kicks and then applying this groove track to the other parts will help you put things back in line. So this is my process, just to let you guys know. When I do record a real drummer with multiple mics and multiple stuff, obviously I start with kick and snare. I start with the kick and work on EQ and compression. I then bring the snare in and work on getting those two to play nicely together. And then I start looking at time. Once I have my basic effects down and my mix down, then I'll start working with time and making sure it's perfectly on a click. Obviously, if I interjected the click into this, I don't know what the BPM of this project is, but it's certainly not 120. So I'd have to go in and get the BPM going and whatnot. Probably not something I'm going to do now. But that's what you do for a drummer. They end up probably playing to a very specific click. But even so, they're not perfect, as I mentioned. So I want to get this track. I think this is what you're waiting for. I know I'm presenting a lot of anxiety and anticipation in how I'm going to get this to all work correctly with each other now. I'm going to go ahead and click on this track. I'm going to go ahead and put this into rhythmic flexing as well. And you can see the minute I hit flex, boom, the rhythm and the flex markers are there. And you can see they don't line up. Very specifically, this one. See this and this and this and this. These are the kicks, and they're off by just a little bit. Is it audible? Probably not. These are behind now. And you can see there's a huge time difference here. These are behind. These are behind. These are behind. It's crazy. So I have a couple options here. I mean, I could try to go in and quantize track number 2 to that same grid. This one was in quarter note. So let's throw this one in quarter note and see what happens. Quarter note, boom. Actually, it doesn't look so bad. Kick, 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 kick. Looks pretty good. Remember, this is the overhead mic, so the snares are going to be the ones that are really going to jump out. But it looks like this snare and this snare are off a little bit, and this snare and this snare are off a little bit. So that really doesn't exactly work all the time. And you can see how big of a change that was, by the way. Check that out. Big change. So many little movements that were made by the computer to get things to be in line. Now, recall that we can actually go in and turn on our groove track. So we're going to go in to our track header, which is this guy right here. We're going to right click. We're going to go into track header components, and we're going to go down the groove track. This was on the test either last week or the week before. So now that I created a groove track, I'm going to make this guy, since I know he's lined up in exactly the way I want it, he's going to be the master groove. All right, so I'm going to make him the master groove. And then I'm going to make this track compile to that. You see what happened? Quantization actually changed here in the inspector. So quantization is off right now. When I do this, it actually shows audio 1 with a star, meaning that's the one it's going to go by. And it actually did a much better job of lining these guys up. Look how awesome it is now. It is perfect. I do this almost to every single one of my recorded drum tracks. Kick, snare. I get them to work perfectly together. And listen, I can go along and kind of make everything work. Check this out. I don't need to make this the master track. I can actually make this the master track, which is my reference track, by the way. How cool is that? And then I can have the other ones applied to that. Let's hear what this sounds like. Ugh. And now you're probably anticipating, how am I going to bring in this track? Well, let's listen to the whole thing. It's actually not terrible. So it gets a little dirty here because we're using a mixed track down here at the bottom, my reference track, as an analyzation. Let's hear it without that being. Let's make this the master groove. Actually, we're going to go back out of that. There we go. We'll make this the master groove, and then we'll apply it to the second track. And we won't bring our reference track in right now. Let's just hear these two together and see how they connected to each other better. Ooh, little change there. Ooh, little change there. So there are still some imperfections here that I would be very careful of. Obviously, you want to go back through and listen to the whole thing. Like I said, you spend a lot of time working with the kick drum first before you apply that groove to another track. Otherwise, you're going to have a mess on your hands. And I have a little bit of a mess on my hands. So I'd probably have to go back through my original kick drum here and make sure it's exactly what I want. Again, probably note by note. Yeah, I would probably go through this note by note, piece by piece, and make sure that every single one of my hits are exactly where I want them to be. And once I have that perfected, I can apply that groove to other tracks I've recorded. I could put it into the toms, the floor tom, the overheads, the room mic, anything that's there. And as I do that piece by piece, one by one with groove tracking, it kind of starts snapping things in and out together. Again, each time I add a new track to the mix, I'm going to go back and listen to make sure that that groove track is applying correctly. And if it's not, I might go back in and just use a simple quantization instead of groove tracking to get that back in line with the rest of the mix. Doing this kind of work can help you perfect that drum track. It really is a great tool to use. Now, Logic isn't the only one that has this. Pro Tools had something like this as well. And it is very much used throughout our industry. When you're recording real drums, you're never going to have a robot. No one's going to be perfect. So you want to go in and, again, making a good performance into a great performance. This is one of the ways to do that, to make the drummer sound like he's inhuman, that he's perfect. And you wonder why a lot of times you listen to a band's album online or streaming or whatever it is, and the final project sounds amazing. How does it sound so good? How come I don't hear any? He must have played that 15 to 20 to 30, 40 times, whatever. No, the answer is he probably played it 5 times. They probably used the best of the sections using maybe comping or a pack take foldering. They then bounced out and got themselves a single comp. And then they used FlexTime, or they used something comparable in the software they're recording in, to align all their drum beats together to make sure it did sound perfect and polished and clean. These are the methods that real producers are using to get these drums to sound amazing. Now, when you want to talk about adding in another layer of tone, of voice, of things like pianos, whatever it is, FlexTime works with that too. It's not just this. It's not just drums. It's not just snares or percussionary instruments, but it works with all sorts of things. And that includes, like I said, guitars, pianos, the human voice, or anything that you want to be in there. And if you can connect them all using groove tracking, man, you wonder why these mixes just sound so complete and so tied into each other, because there's so much time spent doing these things. And by time, I mean the time it takes for a professional to know what to do, to apply those settings, and to finalize it, listen to it, quality control it. For some people, it'll take much longer than others. But if you do it and practice it and try it and be a master at it, it is just part of your normal routine. It doesn't become something that takes hours or days or weeks to do. It just becomes the thing that he needs to do or she needs to do. It's just one of those things in the step of the process. And that's what it's become for me. It's become a step in the process. Now, here's the problem for this particular project, just to give you a heads up. Doing this is actually going to look weird on camera. As you can see, I'm matching video and audio together. So when that snare hits, I better hear it. I've actually had to shift off the video from the audio a little bit just to make them sync up, because there's sometimes a lag in how the computer processes video and audio. So I have to readjust and resync things. That's why film crews use a clapper, take 2. And they do that so they can match up audio to video. That's why that thing exists, by the way. So I didn't do that for this. So I had to literally go by my first snare hit and match it up. When I did FlexTime, it could have pulled that timing out. So what I'd probably end up doing here is going through all the audio processing and getting it to be perfect and in line and quantized to sound good with my reference track. And then go into my video and sync it up. So the video in this case would be last as opposed to being first. Then I'd probably end up exporting this and bring it into a video editing software, which then I would be able to use it with other elements as well. So it's, again, a lengthy process if you think about it before you do it. But once you start doing it and going through it, it ends up being, like I said, part of your normal routine, something that you'll do now each and every time you record percussionary instruments. You'd go in, you'd apply your EQ and compression, do your normal volume mixing, and then you'd start to apply time-based editing by using FlexTime, by quantizing, by groove tracking, creating a master track that you can apply then to other tracks in your mix, and then carefully stepping through it piece by piece so you don't do a process and find out later that you screwed up. And then you have to go backtracking through hours and hours of work. That's why it's so important to be very, very specific each and every time you make a move. From the first time you apply your flex time to the type of flex you're going to do, to applying that flex to a quantization grid, or making it a master groove track that then can be applied to other ones. And each and every time you're applying it, you're listening back and making sure problems aren't cropping up. So that's a lot of information for you. I'll start by saying, does anybody have any questions about flex time? That is a very thorough investigation on flex time. And there was a lot of questions in your Project 9 and 9As from you guys that I read through that had questions about flex time. And I'm pretty sure he covered some of this in the videos, in the masterclass videos. But for us, this is how we can apply it, practically apply it to the things that we do, whether it be in class. And see, if we were in class at this point, I'd probably be using drum tracks and using the drum room at this point in the year. But this is the way that we're able to get good recordings to sound perfect. So questions, anybody? And again, if you missed something or it didn't kind of click in with you, please, I implore you to go on the YouTube page and watch it over again and stop it and process and think about what we were talking about and the steps that I took piece by piece to get to where I was. Okay. Well, listen, if no one has a question, that's awesome. That means you all get it. You can all be master flex timers by the time we get back to school. So here's the deal. Again, no work is due Friday. There is still a quiz Friday, by the way. It's starting to be built now. But I expect anyone that has not handed in a project to go back and hand in a project they may have missed, hand in all the projects they have missed. It's been a long time since some people have even touched any work in this class. And I don't know what you think is going to happen, but I do know what will happen. And I, again, implore you to make sure you get all that work done. All right. So tomorrow, 10 a.m., right back here, same bat time, same bat channel. Again, thanks everybody for coming in and hanging out. And we will see you tomorrow. Later.